Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason, and in today's video, I wanted to take a look at coaching around the CFL, what I think about the current head coaches around the league and the success that they're having or not having, look at their backgrounds, their current records in the regular season, what playoff success they've had, and whatnot. But with that said, let's get into it. So over on the board, I have the list of the 9 CFL head coaches, their regular season record, some of their backgrounds, and how long they've been at the position. So first off, we're going to talk about who I think is the best head coach in the CFL right now, and that is Mike O'Shea of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He has an 84-59 record as of week 3 of the 2023 CFL season. Obviously has the 2 Grey Cup championships in 2019 and 2021. And what else can you say about Mike O'Shea? He's had an excellent run as the head coach of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. One thing I wonder about with O'Shea in the future is the future of him as a potential executive with this team, because Kyle Walters, the GM, was rumored that he may be leaving at some point. So it should be interesting to see what happens in the future with that, if he gets more of front office responsibility in addition to his duties as a head coach. And we'll talk about some of the other teams that do that around the CFL and some of the mixed results they've had. So I think O'Shea's done an excellent job as head coach. He's been there since 2014. He has a background in special teams. He was a special teams coordinator with Toronto before he got the job in Winnipeg. And he also obviously was an excellent defensive player as a linebacker in the CFL for a long time. So that's what his background's in. Not much more you can say about O'Shea, multi-time Grey Cup champion. And then moving on, you have Ryan Dinwiddie of the Toronto Argonauts. He is 22-12 as of week 3 of 2023. Has the Grey Cup championship last year with the Toronto Argos, and he's been there since 2021. He's had a really impressive couple-year run here in Toronto, and I think there was a lot of doubters when Toronto hired him to be the head coach. He comes over as an offensive coordinator in Calgary, and he was a recent quarterback in the CFL before that. And I think that as a young guy, people kind of doubted him. You saw a lot of scuffles on the sideline that first couple of years in Toronto. So a lot of people doubt his ability to keep control of his team. But I think from a schematic standpoint, you really can't doubt what Dinwiddie brings to the table. I think he has been one of the best offensive play callers in the CFL ever since he's become a head coach. And even before that with Calgary, I think the the offensive coaching in Calgary has really declined, I think, since Dinwiddie has left there. So I think at the end of the day, he is one of the best coaches in the CFL, does not get enough respect. Then moving on to Dave Dickinson of the Calgary Stampeders. His record all-time with the Stampeders is 74-31-2. So the 2 ties there against Ottawa. He won his Grey Cup championship in 2018. Also had a couple of big losses in the Grey Cup in 2016 and 2017 with truly juggernaut Calgary Stampeders teams. And he's also the general manager of this team as well as of this offseason after the retirement of John Hufnagel, who was the longtime general manager and head coach there in Calgary. So this is one thing that I think people will criticize Calgary for, is that they gave the GM job to Dickinson as well. So I think, filling both roles is, very tough thing to do in the CFL. I think, just so much responsibility between those two things. But I think little things like the operations cap, the football coaches cap that is around the CFL is a big restraint on teams right now. So I can understand why Calgary gave Dave Dickinson that role, but at the end of the day, I think some of the moves they made this offseason have really brought his role as the GM into question. But I don't think anybody can deny he's been a really, really good head coach for the Stampeders. Obviously, with a background in offense, being a quarterback in the league for a number of years, actually, I think has the highest career passer rating in CFL history, and obviously was the offensive coordinator in Calgary before being promoted to head coach in 2016. So, I mean, he's had a remarkable run in Calgary. I think, the best years were at the beginning of his tenure, so it's kind of been going a little bit downhill the past couple of years, but still a playoff team there in Calgary, and I think he's still one of the better coaches in the league. But like I said, I have questions about him filling that general manager role going forward. Then moving on to Rick Campbell with the BC Lions. He has a record of 64-77-2 Not the greatest record. Going back to that time in Ottawa, didn't really have the best regular seasons there. Had a couple of good years, but I mean, at the end of the day, still a below 500 coach for his career. But he does have that 2016 Grey Cup championship with Henry Burris with the Ottawa Red Blacks. So, I mean, he is a Grey Cup winning coach, has that pedigree. He has his background in defense and special teams. That's primarily what he did before he took hold of this job in BC in 2021. And I think that Campbell's done a pretty good job. I think that, I mean, he's not really a guy that gets a ton of credit for what he brings to the table schematically. I think what he really does well is he gets a good staff together. I think BC has probably the best two coordinators in the CFL right now, in Jordan Maximic and Ryan Phillips. So I think they've done a really good job, or Campbell's done a really good job assembling the staff there in BC, and I think they've really established a really good culture over the past couple of years with Mike Riley, Nathan Rourke, and now Vernon Adams. You've seen multiple quarterbacks come through there, but the winning culture is starting to grow there more consistently in BC under Rick Campbell. And then you have Jason Moss for the Montreal Alouettes. He is 41-33 in his head coaching career, dating back to his time in Edmonton. I think that he was unfairly scapegoated after that 2019 season, and you've seen the coaching really go downhill in Edmonton ever since then. And I think that he's off to a really good start in Montreal. He does not have a Grey Cup championship yet, but, I mean, maybe in Montreal, this is the perfect fit for him. I think he's really meshing with Cody Fajardo after being criticized for not meshing with Cody Fajardo in Saskatchewan. So I think he's kind of putting that narrative to bed early on this season. Obviously, he takes hold of the job this year in Montreal, and it was really a controversial hire. I think a lot of people around the league really doubt Jason Moss and what he brings to the table, but I think in general, when you look at the track record of his offenses, he's had a lot of success in the CFL. So I think at the end of the day, he's a great offensive coach, and I'm biased towards offensive coaches. I think when you look at the NFL, for example, that's kind of the direction football is going. Is hiring offensive head coaches. I think defensive head coaches, you can still win with them, obviously, but at the end of the day, I think most of the coaches that are having success in the NFL, for example, and I think a lot of them in the CFL, like Ryan Dinwiddie, I think those are the offensive coaches and not necessarily the defensive ones. So I think Jason Moss is doing a really good job so far in Montreal, and I'm interested to see how he does going forward. Then moving on to Craig Dickenson with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He was hired in 2019, has a 30-23 overall record, has had a couple of really good winning seasons, and then, of course, the really disappointing season last year, but he's off to a pretty good start this year at 2-1. He has his background in special teams, where he was the Riders' special teams coordinator before being promoted to head coach after the departure of Chris Jones in 2019. Dickinson is another one of those guys that gets criticized for not being able to keep control of his team. A lot of penalties, a lot of sideline outbursts over the past couple of years there. But I think at the end of the day, he is a pretty good head coach. Still an above 500 record, even when you take into account that last year in Saskatchewan. And I think, it'll be interesting to see if he has a poor year this year. I think, the management team in Saskatchewan's pretty much on the hot seat with Jeremy O'Day, the GM, as well, included in that. But I think at the end of the day, he's done a pretty good job in Saskatchewan. They've had a couple of really good years there. I mean, his background, of course, is in special teams, so I don't know how much he really brings to the table schematically on offense or defense. I think one thing you could say about Craig Dickinson, he's a guy that's not the best at talking in the media. He kind of says things he shouldn't at times, but I think at the end of the day, like I said, I think he's done a pretty good job in Saskatchewan, and it's kind of a make-or-break year for that whole management team with that team. And then you have Orlando Steinhauer of the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who is 31-22 in his career with the team, and he also holds the President of Football Operations title with the team. He's been there since 2019, which was a magical first year, went 15-3, went all the way to the Grey Cup. It was the best regular season record in franchise history, and even though they didn't, finish the job and win the Grey Cup that year, there's a lot of people that were saying after that season that he was the best head coach in the CFL, but then, every single year has kind of been declining returns for Orlando Steinhauer. Was 8-6 in 2021, the shortened season, 8-10 last year, and then is 0-3 to begin this year. So it looks like it's going to decline every single season under Coach O. So it should be interesting to see what happens the rest of the season. I think that, holding both the president of football operations and the head coaching titles probably buys him a little bit more time than other guys on this list. But at the end of the day, I mean, he's getting a little bit hot. His seat's getting a little bit hot, that is, in Hamilton. A lot of heat for how slow this team has started the past 3 years. And as I don't think I mentioned, he's a defensive head coach, former defensive back in the league, was a defensive coordinator for the Tiger Cats before he was given the job here in Hamilton. So, Steinhauer, kind of divided opinions on him at this point. I don't know if he can turn it around. I think some coaches, they start hot, but then they kind of get figured out as time goes on, and I'm kind of afraid that's what's happened here in Hamilton, but at the end of the day, we'll see how it goes the rest of the season. And then moving on to Chris Jones in Edmonton, speaking of how it will go the rest of the season, he is 57 and 54 in his career as a head coach. He's won the Grey Cup title in 2015 with Edmonton, ironically, but that was his first stint when they had Mike Riley. He holds the GM and head coaching jobs in Edmonton, and I think with the situation that they had a couple of years ago when they cleaned house, they kind of had to have a guy that held both titles, and Chris Jones was one of the few candidates out there that fit the bill, that had experience. So, I mean, they kind of had a weird marriage there, and I think that ever since he's taken hold over, I think there hasn't really been many signs of improvement. I think it was 4-14 last year, 0-3 to begin this season. I think it's very disappointing how they've begun the season because of all the additions they made in the offseason. This roster looked incredibly improved on paper. So his seat's getting pretty warm in Edmonton as well as Coach O in Hamilton. But I think at the end of the day, like I said about Coach O, holding both positions and the situation within the coach's salary cap, I think that probably buys Chris Jones a little bit more time. I think Jones has 2 more years on his contract after this, so Edmonton would have to be paying him for 2 more years if they fired him. So that's a tricky situation to navigate if you're Edmonton. Of course, he's a defensive head coach who's, holds the defensive coordinator position as well for Edmonton. So he's really wearing 3 hats. He's wearing probably too many hats for this organization at this point, too many responsibilities. So that's something to keep in mind with Chris Jones. But I think the main thing with his job so far in Edmonton in his second stint is his mismanagement of the quarterback position. And I think that's probably going to be his undoing with the organization because he just cannot get this position right. I think they've shown improvement on the defensive side, but I think at the end of the day, if you can't get that quarterback position right, you're not going to last long as a head coach in the CFL. And then the final guy here is Bob Dyce, who is a first-time head coach. Just hired this year in Ottawa. He is 0-2 so far in his young coaching career. Not too much to say about him. He has a background as an offensive coordinator, but most notably as a special teams coordinator, which he held there in Ottawa before he was hired. So very interested to see how he does going forward. Don't really have too much to say about the job he's done. I like kind of the style he's coached with the first couple games of the season. He's hasn't been afraid to go for it on 3rd down. I think that is one thing I value with CFL head coaches. Not too many coaches around the league willing to take the risk on the 3rd and goal to go for it unless it's on the 1-yard line. I think Bob Dyce has shown that willingness to be aggressive the first couple weeks of the season despite the lack of success for his offense. So I'm interested to see how the rest of his coaching tenure goes. But at the end of the day, I don't think I could judge the job that Dyce has done yet because he doesn't have his starting quarterback healthy. It's really unfortunate situation there with Jeremiah Mazzoli. Don't know when he's going to be back. So at the end of the day, I'm interested to see how Bob Dyce does. But like I said, can't judge him until the quarterback is healthy. And with that said, that is going to be the end of today's video, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to thank each and every one of you for watching. Be sure to let me know, who do you think is going to get fired on this list by the end of the season? I think it should be interesting to see if there's any changes to the coaching cycle by the end of the year. I think with the way that it started for certain teams this year, I think it's going to be very interesting to see the decisions and the direction that some of these organizations do if they don't turn it around. But that said, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.